Hey there, hey there, hey there. So I got some monster ideas for you already. Alright now, are you ready? Are you ready? Alright, first off, we have the Red Jester Angel. This, dark-winged angelic jester, dresses in a red and black cherry, Jerry Jester outfit with a lot of card patterns on it, and has a smiling theater mask on that he kind of hides, kind of horrifying face under. Yeah, he tried. All right, now he's not actually, a bad guy. He's just, kind of creepy. Yeah, but he's trying to, entertain people and being very fun, being very fun loving. But due to his, unsettling inhuman appearance, he comes off, as rather, creepy and unsettling. Much to, yeah, and unfortunately, he doesn't really quite understand why. All right, now. Yeah, all right now. Yeah, he's an Eldritch Celestial entity, yeah. And so the Courts of Joy, yeah. Alright now. Alright now, yeah. Alright now, Spring Heeled Jackanapes. Alright, this is a pale face, goblin that's, dressed in, red. Sort of like red caps, yeah. And basically is a former circus performer that, invented, spring heel boots that, let him jump around everywhere. Sort of like, actual Goodman boots. And, he goes around throwing knives at people, yeah. With deadly accuracy, Sort of like a flea man, yeah. Alright, next one. We got the Torment Mare. Alright, this looks like a humanoid, horse-like man that, kind of looks like a seahorse, kind of looks like one of those leafy seahorse dragons. Only instead of, leaf like, mimic tentacles, mimic, things, it's sort of like, tentacles actually. Now it's basically based on, recurring, terrible nightmares, basically, which is, how he got formed and manifested into reality, due to telemancy. Yeah, so he's not, so it's not very good news, no. Basically, it's an evil, yeah. Which, evils are basically, tulpas are basically are formed from, more negative and dangerous emotions, yeah. Alright, next one is the Dead Lotus Man. Alright, it looks like a humanoid that looks like it's made out of a dead, lotus seed pod. It has a big, dead lotus seed pod for a head. It also, has the ability to, terrify people with the fear of holes, which it often uses in its combat. It's also a water dwelling beast. It's also a water dwelling creature that often appears around lakes and ponds and all that, and rivers. He often chokes it up with lotuses, which he can grow, which are pretty thorny pretty thorny, but very beautiful flowers. Yeah, that seed pods creep a lot of people out due to tryptophobia. All right, now next up is the High Hiver. All right, this looks like a thin wispy tree that has a giant living hive on it that's controlling the tree spirit against its will. And the hive has the little angry eyes on it, looks like a gigantic beehive that's filled with killer bees, which it shoots out like missiles. Yeah, there we go. Yeah, missiles with little stingers on them that are highly toxic. Oh no, African ice killer bees. Bees, my god. Speaking of bees, the next one is Empress Trine. Now, Trine, if you don't know, they're like bee nymphs that were basically part of Apollo and all that. We're basically part of the worship of Apollo or something like that. Anyway, this one looks like it's human size. It has big thick thigh highs on that are dark, and has those yellow heels on, and runs around carrying a whip and is very dominant. Has a big crown on their head. Yeah. Pretty much the I'm the boss and you better expect that. Very much a him and dairy type of personality, really. Only much more aggressive and dominant, really. All right. Now, next one that's not one of my barely disguised fetishes. The roly poly. All right, this thing looks like a roly poly inside with a bowler hat, sort of like a mobster, and it carries around a giant bowling ball. Competes in the underground, bowling league and the insect kingdom, inside of a giant rotting log that's basically modeled to look like a casino and all that, but a whole bunch of different games and a bowling alley, yeah. Yeah, it's secretly one of the mobsters, but likes to compete in bullying. If push comes to shove, it turns the bowling balls into bombs and rolls them at people, and they explode. All right. Next one is the pool shark. All right, this looks like a shark in a pinstripe suit, plays pool. But they're quite the shark when it comes to it. Often go around scamming people. Mm, with life or death threats. Where they'll probably get eaten if they lose. Yeah. Also, he's like a big shader at shark at pool, because of course he is. All right. Speaking of sharks, the next one is shark related too. All right, I call this the Dammerhead Shark. Yeah. All right, now this is an armor plate. This is an armor plated, aggressive, demonic, hammerhead shark man that lives in a lake of fire, which is one of the harshest regions which is the harshest region of hell, which is where where the final judgment lives. It just swims there casually and feeds on sinners. All right. Next one. That bugle beagle. All right, this is a bird that's basically a beagle man. All right, now, I think he might be related to the dog-headed saints, maybe. Eli seems kind of weak on his own, but he blows his trumpet whenever action starts, and he calls in his powerful animal buddies to help protect him. So he's like pretty much the front man. He's like pretty much the front man of a bunch of rowdy beastmen adventurers. Yeah, and pretty awesome too. Yeah. All right, we got the cursed glass slippers. These are a pair of red glass slippers that will bite into people's heels whenever they wear them, and basically control their movements against their will. And basically force them to, dance around and, act like a princess against their will by basically forcing them to go along with it, if they don't, whether they want to or not. They were basically created, by Karabase because she decided, she decided she didn't like somebody, she didn't like a poor girl, asking for wishes, so she decided, to punish her by making these glass slippers and, basically forcing her to go along to a ball, which turned out to be one that was very cursed. Where she, was forced, where she was kind of controlled into marrying, somebody who wasn't very nice to her, yeah. Basically kind of like a horror version of Cinderella, basically. And of course it's Karabase, of course, yeah. We don't like Karabase. She's part of Neo and Celine does all sorts of, cruel things like this, yeah. Alright now. 100 red-handed. Alright, this is an angle that's like made out of hands and looks like a feminine woman. And her hands are, all bloody and red. and most of her body is made up of fused together hands. Even her mouth, looks like it's made up of hands. And she basically goes around taking all sorts of things, not just objects, but things like names and memories and all that. For her, various collection. Basically, she's like a supernatural superpower thief, basically, yeah. Yeah. I was kind of inspired by Hacky Hands to make it. I'm sorry. I think I had them on my mind when I came up with this. Yeah. So anyway. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Oh well, Indumati. Indumati, are you frozen? Oh no. No, frick, I'm frozen. I was frozen today. Anyway, I'll see you later. Remember to fly like Pat and shine like the moon, for we are stuff dreams are made of. Goodbye. It's not a real VTuber stream without scuff, guys. Oh yeah, don't forget to like and subscribe and give me your name, okay?